So the new meta, episode 6, here with Steffen Janzen from Picnic.
Mm-hmm.
So Steffen, what is Picnic? And could give us a quick overview of that, and then we'll get into your life story.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me on today, Nick and Ricky. Good to be here.
Yeah,
Picnic is a content production agency. We help food and agriculture brands tell their story using custom content.
Perfect. So that's that's very wide.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, what are you specializing in within that?
Yeah, we specialize in video production. So everything from your Instagram stories to TV commercials,
Mm-hmm.
and then we also offer photography. So it's a recipe video, stop motion,
Right.
or on location.
Yeah, and you have a commercial kitchen that you can leverage in order to use those things and put those things together.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a studio space, we have kitchen space, food prep space, walk-in fridge, so we are ready to cook something up.
Excellent. So let's loop around now to your life story. Go as far back as you want on this one.
Perfect. And as it relates to marketing, or
Anything that's shaped you.
Yeah.
Like what are the things that have shaped you along the way that make you think the way that you do today? Like A, on being an entrepreneur, but B, also for marketing.
Mm-hmm. I've loved telling stories since I was a little kid. For birthday parties, I'd throw a play or a musical with my friends instead of going go-karting, or I don't know what normal kids do. I've always loved telling stories, and that I've also had the privilege of living overseas. I was born in Malaysia. I've spent a couple of years in Germany, so I think studying and living abroad definitely gives you a flavor for the world. And so storytelling. I also love food. I just love eating food.
Who doesn't?
But as I started working in marketing communications, I grew up on the prairies in Alberta,
right.
And my best friend had a farm, and I grew up playing on the farm and farmers, and kind of the idea of where our food comes from was a very normal part of life.
Right.
We lived right at the edge of town and watched the harvest cycle every single year, and we're always interested in which crops are being grown and the rotation of crops, and that was just a natural part of my life.
Right.
And so when I fast forward 20 years working in the agency world, when I got to work with food clients, that really excited me, getting to know the farmers that grow our food, working with them, and then eventually that inspired me to go into culinary school and to really specialize in combining my love for storytelling with my love for food and agriculture, and how those things come together.
Well, it's interesting, like how what you're doing now versus your life story. It's like you've in essence found a way, and to follow your passion, but it took a while in the sense that you had this background from your life. Then you went into the agency world where you were working with some clients, but probably the majority of the clients weren't that specific niche at the beginning.
No, yeah.
And you had to build up that experience and kind of pay your dues in a way in order to be able to do what you're doing now. Because if we maybe went back 5 or 10 years, like, do you think that you would be able to do this now? And if you could, like, how much harder would that be?
Yeah, totally. I went to university for a business degree because someone told me that business is the study of getting things done, and I was like, I love getting things done. But that's pretty broad. It also leaves the a blank canvas in terms of what I wanted to pursue. Mm-hmm. And very quickly, when I learned about advertising communications and ad agencies, I was like, what? There's you can work as an artist, as a creative, and get paid, and use art as an applied art, to solve problems for people. But I got really excited. So as soon as I kind of hit university, my dream was to work at ad agencies, and I started as a strategist on with a business degree, and really loved it. I love research. I love kind of tackling problems, and so started there. And I had a creative director. I was at an agency in Edmonton at the time. And as I was getting ready to move to BC, he pulled me aside and said, "Steffen, I think you'd be happier on the creative side." And that really surprised me. People that work in ad agencies, some agencies are more strict than others, but there's very clear boundaries in terms of the different teams and the creative teams versus the suits or the marketing account teams.
Mhm.
And so for him to say, hey, I recognize that you have a creative bent and that there's options there, that's what got me into film. And I mean, I'd always done film as a hobby as a
Right.
kid, and that was another big passion of mine. But for someone to say, no, I think you can do this professionally.
Yeah.
And then I was able to make the switch here in BC.
Yeah.
Well, I think what's interesting about this story as well is that, being that you studied business, you were in an agency on the business side as well, and you love research. That's actually very unique, and that's why, when you said, hey, I'm opening this company called Picnic, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to do video and all these things. The first thing that came into my head was the unique value that you bring is that you do those things at a very high level, but you also bring the research side in, where you're doing something that's awesome looking and cool and will get traction in the marketplace, but at the same time, it's not
random.
It's not random. It's like it's well thought out,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of campaigns out there and a lot of content out there that's cool for the sake of being cool, but it doesn't drive results.
Yeah.
And the fact that you bring that research and business side, really gives at least myself confidence that in the long run you're going to do fantastic, because that is something that, having worked with many creative agencies, being part of one myself a couple of times, that's a rare thing.
Mhm.
It's not very common at all.
Yeah, one of our values at Picnic is efficacy,
Right.
which is not a word that is used a lot. But basically, and I think when you're an artist working in an applied setting like business, there's this tension of, I want to make beautiful things and creative things, but I think you need to accept and realize that the art you're making, it serves a purpose. That our work isn't in an art gallery for a reason. It's serving to solve a problem, and the work has to therefore deliver a result. It has to have an effect. It has to have an impact. And I think definitely having a business degree and working as a strategist and consultant at an ad agency helps frame the work that we do. We love telling stories and making videos and taking beautiful pictures, but those all have to serve a purpose.
Right.
And if they're not delivering results for a business, they're not doing their job.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it really is such an interesting path that you've taken. Like, I don't think I know anyone who has like the same path as you. I mean, it's you're someone that really like follows your passions, and you followed those all the way through your career. And every few years, you have these big shifts, and it's like oh yeah, I was over here before, and now I'm way over here, but it's working, right?
Yeah.
And now you found a way to take all of those different paths and combine them into something that's unique, right? And it's interesting because you wouldn't just find anybody doing this, right? Because having all of the background that you do is completely unique to you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely. So, I mean, in your experience then, and so far, what would you say are the top one or two things that are the most important in order to, start a company?
Patience.
Which combines with a really good financial plan prior to opening the business.
Totally. and knowing how to be lean and smart. But I also think relationships. I think that's an ongoing theme in my life, but I couldn't be doing what I am without the people that I get to work with.
Right.
Whether that's my business partner or whether that's past employers,
Yeah.
or people like you that I've worked with and got to know. But those relationships are really what is letting us launch Picnic. We have a whole team of friends and collaborators that are lending their pieces of their portfolio or their time or their space. So I think those recognizing the value that relationships have is key.
I think that, the whole relationship thing, once you're a manager or once you are an entrepreneur, you really understand the value of those. But I think that, sometimes from the outside, people don't necessarily always understand what that means. Like in terms of like a good working relationship versus like an interpersonal relationship, because they're very different things. What would you say is the most important thing in those business relationships, right? Because trust is obviously a big factor, but in your mind is the difference between an interpersonal relationship and like a business one?
I think setting clear expectations. Once you get business and once you get money involved, it gets complicated. So I think everyone being very clear of these are the expectations. This is what I'm giving. This is what I expect to receive. It protects the relationship. So sometimes it's awkward to talk about things like that, but I think it's critical to be able to work together.
Well, it's interesting that you touched on expectations because, that's like a common theme of not just the relationship side, but business in general. Not enough expectations are set, and it is awkward at the beginning, but it makes everyone's life so much easier because when you know what people expect from you, it actually liberates you rather than handcuffs you. People think it's like, oh, I don't want to make a promise. I don't want to say that I'm going to do something because then I'm bound to doing it. But, try somebody giving you money or putting their faith in you and then having no measuring stick. That's a lot more stressful than knowing what you're getting measured against, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So Steffen, what is your definition of success? Because it is different for everybody.
Yeah, I think where your starting point in life determines that. Yeah, influences that question. For me, when I think about like what I like thinking abstract thoughts about what is life, what is reality, or for me,
those are good.
The fabric of reality is relationship, and like when everything else disappears, there's nothing more real than the relationships we have. So I think when I reflect even on my career, some of the most meaningful work I've had, again, when I think about the farmers and the food processors that I've got to work with, spending time on the farm, getting to know these people's families, video is really vulnerable, and I've had lots of opportunities to work with owners of companies and to like spend a day with their family and see how they cook, see how they interact with their kids. Those are very vulnerable settings, and for me that's what makes video work so meaningful, because you have the chance in a very outside of the office, outside of the boardroom, to get to know people on a real level and then to tell their story. And I think having the opportunity to tell people's stories and doing their story justice and honoring them through that process gives me a lot of joy and a lot of fulfillment.
It's interesting because it's what is success? We always usually come back to happiness. And so those are the things that make you happy. When you're able to tell people's story, when you're able to, make those connections with people, it inherently makes you happy. And that's what success is for you, right?
Yeah.
So that's, we always preach that it's that, try to figure out what makes you happy and then try to reverse engineer how to make it so that you can do that and only that for as long as you possibly can.
Yeah.
So in that process then, relationships aside, what have been the moments where those decision points came, because you've done a couple large shifts? What are those things what were those decisions and why were those decisions successful in your opinion?
There's the principle, like any closed system dies, and so like whether at a biological level, so
what you're saying,
yourself in situations where you will be forced to kind of open yourself up, and whether that, so for me sometimes that was just going for coffee with a new person. Like literally I moved to BC because I emailed someone out of the blue and was like, hey, can we do coffee because your story looks really interesting. And a few months later I had a new job out of that, and that was not even my intention. I wasn't looking for work. Where I try to take courses every year, so whether that's conferences or going to summer school or that type of thing, to just introduce, there's that quadrant of you don't know what you don't know. You're never going to find out what you don't know unless you just put yourself in completely new situations. So in my career I've definitely moved around a lot. But each of those moves were a combination of kind of my passions and what brings me joy, with kind of the putting myself into new situations and recognizing that is critical, even though it's scary.
Well, it's really it's venturing into the unknown on purpose.
Yeah.
On a consistent basis, or every couple of years, when you kind of say to yourself, back to the closed system, it's like, I'm only sticking to what I know. I'm sticking into my comfort zone. I need to remove myself from my comfort zone and journey into something that I don't know and try that out, and then try many different things in order to figure out what I need for myself in terms of what drives success for me and happiness. Really. And that is I think a pretty rare thing for most people to do of their own volition without some sort of external factor really pushing them out the door to do it. Because the comfort zone is called that for a reason, because it's comfortable, so why would you want to leave it?
Yeah.
But that's the only way to actually push yourself forward. So, when we get people asking, it's like, well, what else can I do? I don't know what to do. It's like, try new things. Just don't bet the farm on it, but try new things and see what works for you. And then before you start committing to things, right?
Yeah.
And I think that, like, in your case, Steffen, like, not only are you someone that you think very deeply about things, but you also have this very intuitive side. Intuition is a tough thing. A lot of people don't know what to do with it or how to use it. And I think you've really leveraged it to your advantage, because you kind of understand when you need to make a shift. Like, when is it time to do something new? When have you become too comfortable?
Going back to one of your other questions in terms of like things that have helped, I think it's a bit of a buzzword. But emotional intelligence but
what's emotional intelligence to you?
For me, well, maybe I won't try to define it, because there's people that probably do that better. But practical ways, speaking again of behaviors or things I've done, but like I think everyone should go to counseling. Counseling is not everyone. There's a stigma around that and mental health and things that's only for people that are broken or messed up. And it's like, well, that's all of us. So, but those things,
we're all a bit weird. Yeah, that's what it comes down to.
And self-reflection, and again, so letting other people give you feedback, whether that's through a formal personality assessment or a workshop or reading. But it's difficult because the areas of emotional intelligence that each one of us have to work at are so different for every person. So, but just learning to identify your gaps, so that you can either mitigate or work on them, and also understanding your strengths.
On that note, like, one of the weaknesses that I have, that I know that I have, is I understand people's mental states infinitely well. Like, I know if somebody's going through something, I'm like, this is where they're at. I know that this is their state of mind right now. And so I always make the mistake of being able to think that I can judge what somebody's going to do, because I'm a very good judge of the mental state. But my weakness is that I think that the mental state is the end all be all of what the future action is going to be, when their emotions distort the mental state. So you have a state of mind, and then you have the emotion that goes with that state of mind. And when the state of mind crashes into the emotion, instead of it being predictable, like, oh, it's going to go in a straight line, the emotion can refract and bend the action of the person. And I think that, when I look at that, and even for myself or in business, the thing that I really come out with is, there's no way you can estimate somebody's frame of mind, but you can't estimate their emotion unless you form some form of relationship with them. And ultimately, if you really want to help someone, get their state of mind better, you have to go through the emotional filter in order to do that. And you have to understand that emotional filter and actually help that person.
Yeah. I think that's a really helpful thing to understand as a marketer specifically, because human beings aren't rational, and our purchasing decisions aren't. There's this whole subconscious.
We'd like to think we are. Right?
It makes sense to us.
But the unconscious decisions that we make, and the emotional decisions, everything starts with the emotions. And so I think a good piece of advertising or a good piece of marketing usually is always connected to a deep human truth in terms of how we operate or behavior or what's really important in life. And it's funny that when you start watching commercials that way, because sometimes it's so blatant it's painful because they're trying to sell you happiness or something. But I think that's also working in advertising. A lot of people complain about, I'm being manipulated, and I think if there aren't any secret tools that marketers have in terms of the manipulation field. I think we all have a responsibility to be self-aware and understand our own emotions. And that'll help us discern whether the material good can actually deliver what it's promising.
Right.
Anyways.
Well, I know that in the past, having worked together, we've turned down work for companies that had a misleading product or a product that we didn't believe in was in, say, like the greater good of society or what have you. And, we really believe in that because things have to do what you say that they're going to do, but it's also like, is this something that's going to make somebody's life better or not? And that's very important, right? And in what context, right? Because if we lose that, we at some point have to like check our own ethics and say, am I doing this for the money or not? And that short-term chase for the dollar is always the wrong thing to do, right? Like you have to play the long game. You have to say, am I going to look back 10 years from now and wish that I hadn't done this? Because, my ethics would have been intact, and then make decisions on that basis, even though it might hurt, the checkbook today.
Back to patience, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think marketers need to be careful that marketing is a value exchange, right? And we need to be careful that the value we're promising is actually the value that's being delivered. And those values, the value can be an intangible benefit, like feeling better or feeling more confident or feeling more sexy. Those are all things that a brand can do, because branding does a lot more than sell a product or a service or a good. So that can be legitimate, but I think consumers today see through a proposition that isn't genuine. That's ridiculous or.
Yeah, I think the consumer, as time goes on, is only going to get smarter, and so marketers are always going to try to stay ahead. But I don't think that they really can, because at some point you exhaust tapping into what the human psyche is. Like you can adjust for culture, but that's about it, right? Because human beings, like we change in the sense that our environment changes, but like who we are as people generally doesn't change all that much. And what ends up truly mattering to an individual or a series of individuals is more or less the same, now from 10 years from now, right?
Yeah, it's a real privilege when you work with brands like Silver Hills Bakery, where I've spent time with the owners and in their homes, and you see that their personal values really line up with their corporate values. And you see how that has really shaped their product offering. Their product is superior, but their original vision wasn't to make the best product. It was actually to help improve people's lives. And so it's a real privilege. That's why I find food and agriculture is very genuine, because you have a lot of people who really care about helping one another, and food is sustenance, but it's also expression.
Right.
And there's so much that can be done there.
When you're talking about, wanting to do good, right, and having good corporate values, there's so many of these companies out there, or individuals even with a product or with something that they're doing, and they have no understanding of, or very little perhaps, of business or marketing, and not knowing how to get that to the market, right? And that's actually, I think, one of the most gratifying things with marketing, is being able to build relationships with those people and help them actually bring to market the thing that they do that's such high quality or is so great and unique, but they don't know how to get it to people, right?
Yeah.
And so like that, for me, that's definitely like a really gratifying part of it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think that speaking, even Instagram obviously is a big platform for video and photography, but I was just reading this morning, and it resonates with me about how the very filtered existence on Instagram is becoming less and less popular among millennials and the next generation, where this constantly curated.
It's the highlight reel of
Yeah.
a person's life.
But even brands and people, that people are getting tired because everyone's starting to realize this isn't real. This makes me feel nice for a limited time, but
Or insecure by
or
looking at all those
insecure.
things.
Yeah, totally. So I think that there's a real hunger for something genuine.
Well, I think that the authenticity factor in a lot of these things is missing at this time. But as people demand it, that's the way to win,
Mhm.
right? So if you want to have that large following for whatever reason, if people are demanding authenticity and you're not giving it to them, well, you're not going to garner that following and that influence anymore. But it's really the market that decides at the end of the day. But I think that, there's a lot of programs and a lot of, news and media that are bringing attention to the fact that it's like, look, these things are making people feel bad. There's psychological studies. People are more depressed when they look at the highlight reel of other people's lives because they're like, my life isn't like that. But not understanding that the person that they're looking at, their life isn't like that either.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, they're like fronting. So it's like, they go to Holton Renfrew or they buy, like one pair of like Gucci shoes. It's like, yeah, but they only did that once in 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's not like they're there every other week. I mean, some people are, but not probably that person most likely,
Mm-hmm.
Based on like the average. So, really trying to take a step back and analyze that though is almost impossible because when you're scrolling through, 50 pictures in a 1 minute session, or how long are you going to really stop to think at the person that just went on a shopping spree and you're looking at their photo and being like, oh man, like I wish I could do that, and then just keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like no one's actually stopping to think about, well, that person's doing that once a year or once every 3 years or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so, but our brain doesn't, unless we stop and really anchor ourselves into thinking about these things,
Mm-hmm.
like it's never gonna, we're never gonna actually like see that. And in addition to that, it's like, who has the time to like rationalize every single photo that they see on Instagram?
Yeah.
It's not feasible.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think you're seeing the trend in micro influencers partly because they are more authentic. They're not.
Yeah.
They don't have the millions of followers, but they're more relatable. They're highly targeted. They're speaking to a group of people that can identify with them, and also influencers are creating more content for brands because that content also feels more authentic than. I mean, I've done the agency content and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
But you can tell it's been produced.
Yeah.
In a studio, or it's been produced kind of removed from daily life.
Yeah.
And so I think you definitely see that in the trends of what type of content is being created and what people are gravitating towards.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think like, for me, I still like, I go to the movies and I see some of these ads that are produced and, I know for a lot of people it's like, oh man, I got to sit through 10, 15 minutes of ads.
I actually
But
like it.
for me, as a marketer, I'm like, I love seeing like a really well thought out, really well produced, ad that like pulls at the heartstrings and you're just like, that was incredible,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, I still appreciate that. And I appreciate all the stuff that that's more authentic and the less perfect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it just has its place. Right?
Yeah. My wife watches Jeopardy when she can, and we always joke because I'll sit there with her, but I watch the commercials and she watches Jeopardy. And we can't have a conversation because when she's on break to have a conversation, I'm like glued to the commercials.
Yeah.
And we're having a baby in September, and there was a Kia commercial where the male partner is more nervous than he's driving his partner to the hospital.
Right.
She's about to give birth, but
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
more nervous than she is. And
Yeah.
it was funny because again, I was like, oh, suddenly it's relatable because I'm going
Right.
through a similar
Oh,
thing
yeah.
in life. Clearly, that's targeted at someone like me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was speaking to real emotions that we have, and that
Yeah.
you have a connection
And,
point.
and that's well thought out. Like that somebody thought about
Yeah.
that moment and how important that is
Mhm.
to that specific person, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember for myself, like, you would not have seen a slower driver on the way back from the hospital, right? I must have been going 30 the whole way because I was like so scared with the baby in the back, It's
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, this is terrifying.
Yeah.
Now it's just like whatever. but you know, that first drive is like, oh my gosh, it's so scary.
Sleep deprivation doesn't help either.
No, it definitely does not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, an important thing to touch on, I think social media and marketing is, you know, what the reality is behind these things. And, you know, what's the responsibility of us to communicate the messages in terms of, you know, if people are trying to achieve certain lifestyles and things like that, it's like people can, you know, bankrupt themselves trying to achieve the things that they see on social media with influencers and other things like that, and like going beyond their means where their lives actually become worse. So, you know, when it comes to the topic of marketing, and this is why, you know, I always bring up the responsibility item is, as a marketer, it's impossible to do a good job for a client if you don't believe in their product. That it's going to make people's lives better. Because otherwise you're just going to mechanically go through the motions and do the best you can, but without that passion, and like passion ignites the creative spark. Without that, it's like that magic is never going to get, you know, bottled so that you can share it with everybody else.
Totally, yeah. And often the people behind, when I'm doing a branding exercise, it's so important for me in my process to understand, to get to know the people behind it, because usually that's where you find the spark, where you find the story, where you find, because every product or service, the person that created it was responding to a real need that they either felt or saw, experienced firsthand. But over time, you can lose kind of where was that? What was it that got things started in the first place? So I love the origin story of a company or organization is usually a helpful place to find that seed of inspiration.
Well, I'm just talking to people inside of the company, right? So yesterday it was interesting. I went to do a presentation of a proposal, and the guy looked at the price and said, well, how can I cut this down? And I'm like, well, it's a digital marketing audit. We need to do interviews internally, this, that, whatever. And he looked at me and said, well, why can't it be half the price, just eliminate the interviews? I just want you to do the data analysis and the measurement to see, you know, if my marketing is A, working, but B, like how to make it work from, you know, an ROI perspective. And, you know, it was with the general manager and the controller. And I said to him, I'm like, look, like if I don't understand your culture and why things happen, like I need to go talk to your frontline salespeople, I need to talk to the people in the field, I need to talk to people in the office to understand your culture. Like I can read your values. I mean, they're on the wall. I read them while I was sitting, you know, having a coffee, but until I talk to your people and really deconstruct and get to the heart of what your culture and your values actually mean in practice, it's impossible for me to then just look at the data and say like, this is the answer, because the data is contextual to like the human attributes of like the culture and the people that work in it. Because if I give you an answer based on the data that's, you know, over here, but based on the culture and the type of people that exist in a business, it's like, well, that answer could be not possible because it won't mesh well with what they think, or, you know, there's a very much like a slant to like these other things over here that are of great value. Well, you're better off taking, if, you know, this thing over here is the best idea, you're better off with the second or third best idea over here if it resonates internally, culturally for the people. Because people will believe in it more, and even though it's not the best solution, it will become the best solution for that company. And, you know, and really trying to explain that to somebody, like, no, like the best answer isn't always the answer. The best answer is the one that fits best with who you actually are as a business and a culture. It's not something that's very intuitive for people.
Yeah, creative buy-in and ownership is so critical. There's been, I think it's tempting for agencies to fall in love with their ideas, and so it's like, oh, this is a great idea. But if the client or the team you're working with, if they don't live and breathe it as well, then there's a very short shelf life to that idea, because it won't live beyond. I think, again, speaking to things that I see as a success is when something becomes someone else's, and you see a campaign or an idea live for years after you've had any influence, where you're no longer working at the organization, but that continues, and then you saw how excited people got about it, and it became their own. And I think that's,
and it changes a little bit over time, and it takes it on a life of its own after a while, right? Which is, you know, it's kind of like the legacy of the idea at that point. You know, and that's always awesome to see. Steffen, right now you're in startup mode. So what are the challenges? Because I mean, you've been in agencies that are, once they're up and running, in high growth agencies as well that went, across Canada. What are you seeing as the biggest challenges of starting your own business?
Mm-hmm. Give me a moment, I need to think. I feel like I'm so at the beginning of it, and I'm like...
But even taking the steps to get to where you are, there's tough emotional things to grapple with as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely you have to kind of confront your own insecurities of like, I have this idea, but is it actually going to work? And how long do you work at something?
The fear of failure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Before it's validated as a viable business plan, a viable business option.
Yeah.
So I think iterating, like the approach we've taken is to have hardly any overhead or startup costs, so that we're able to kind of iterate, to try a lot of things, work with a lot of people to see what works and how we can add value.
Yeah.
And then there's, again, the serendipitous relationships. We're in a film studio space that's part of a meal kit company, so it's actually a freezer that's been refurbished, and right beside we have food prep going on. So being that was totally unexpected. I didn't think we could find when you're looking for kitchen space, film studio space, and office space at a reasonable price in a central location. I had kind of given up that it just wasn't going to happen. But met a friend and he was like, "Oh, I've got exactly that." So I'm a slow and steady kind of guy, so it's like I know where I want to get, but it kind of just have to start, and you just need to go. And like 3 months ago, I didn't think we would find a space. I didn't think that a space like this even existed, but if you don't just start, and you're never gonna find those opportunities.
What would you say your biggest challenges right now?
Well, I guess when you don't have a team that's dedicated, like just the capacity. So like small stuff like getting your portfolio and your reel done when you have limited people that we don't have anyone on salary. We're a team of contractors right now, and so everyone who's helping is pitching up. So is pitching in. Sorry.
So timelines become an issue because there's other client matters to take care of.
Totally.
The client work generally ends up coming first.
Yeah, and you can if you have unlimited capital, then obviously you can do things. But if you're trying to do things cost effectively, then there's trade-offs to make there.
Well, and it's important because the cash management side of the business is the make or break. There's great ideas that don't survive long enough to make it because of the cash management side. So that can never be understated. So running lean is always the way to go. Because the one thing that I've always known is that things always take longer than you think they are. So you say, hey, by 6 months we're going to be here, and by 12 months we're going to be here. It's like, well, 6 months is probably 9 to 12 months, and if not even maybe 14 months, and 1 year is really like 18 months to 2 years. Right? Because, once, like at a high level, once you're like, oh, we're going to do this much in sales and have this many employees and these things, until you get into it, it doesn't befall you how long things take to get up and running. It's a lot easier to get from 1 to 2 than it is from 0 to 1. Going from 0 to 1 is a fight, but then duplicating that, going from 1 to 2 is 10 times easier than 0 to 1, right? So that's like the whole startup thing in my mind.
And I think understanding your own style and strengths, and like I'm not someone that likes doing things alone, just in life generally. And so I chose to go into business with a business partner and someone who has different skill sets. And definitely I wouldn't want to be starting a business without the people that I'm doing it with. Because again, back to relationships, that energizes me in terms of, I'm an introvert. I don't actually love spending a ton of time, but when I do spend time with people, I like spend quality time. So being able to work in a team environment for me has, on those days where you're like, is this even, should I even be trying to do this? To know that you're not alone. And even we're really lucky in the Lower Mainland. There's an agency owners group, so I went to one
Right.
of those lunches and just
Yeah.
being in a room with 30 other people that are at various stages of launching their own agencies, and veterans who've been doing it for 20, 30 years,
Yeah.
and people that are a week old
Yeah.
in terms of their business is really encouraging. So I think for me, I've needed that emotional support.
Yeah.
I'm also a very intuitive, emotional person, so I know that I need those types of support networks
Right.
in my life versus other people who are the total opposite.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that entrepreneurs, and I think this is actually like a large problem, like there isn't enough support. People, I don't think, unless you've done it yourself, people really understand just how much pressure it is to start your own business, because your friends and family know about it. There's pressure to perform. It's very difficult to not care. And because people will say, it's easy, just don't care about your failure and don't care what other people think about you. It's like, well, that requires a ton of emotional and personal emotional intelligence for yourself to rationalize that. And some people, frankly, I don't think can do that. You can minimize it, but is it zero? Maybe not, especially when, it's like your wife or your parents or but I think it's important to try to reduce it as much as possible, point A. But point B, having that support, within the entrepreneurship community where somebody else has experienced that, it's a big deal. And I mean, we've seen, in the news, it's startup entrepreneurs that, go into deep depressions and things like this. And it's probably a lot more common than even the media really lets on, because it's a tough thing to get off the ground. And, I tell anybody that's thinking about starting a business, it's like, how much do you care about what people think of you? Be honest. And if you're not going to be honest with me, be honest with yourself, because that point alone can just crush you to start off. B, do you have enough money for the next 3 to 6 months? Good. Okay, cut those expenses in half. Now you have money for twice as long because you're going to need it. And then, what's your backup plan? Write it down once, take an hour to write it down, never look at it again. Never even consider it again. But you need it because otherwise, entrepreneurship is not for everybody. Some people are really good first employees, second employees, even executives, but not everybody's cut out to actually start a business from scratch. And also the odds are really bad.
So I think being on the same page with your partner or the people in your life. I'm fortunate my wife's family is a business family, and she's, I think, has a better sense of what we're setting ourselves up for than I even do. And but I think it's important to have that support.
Absolutely.
What I didn't appreciate enough was when I quit my job, and then I had 2 months before my baby was being born. What I didn't appreciate enough was that time before everything else, right? Because that was a very productive time for me, right? And then once life happens, it's there's certain things you got to be there for, and things can be very distracting, right? So you have to work through those things, right? You have to find ways around that, but it's the time that you have leading up to that, it's make good use of it. Don't squander that time, because
it's so interesting because I mean, I don't have the energy that I did when I was in my 20s. There's no way. And anybody that says different is lying. You can be mentally energized, but physically it's try doing 3, 4, 16 to 17 hour work days in a row. It's when you're in your 20s, totally doable. In your 30s, it's your mind might be there, but your body might not want to really follow suit on that. And then the other thing is responsibility. As you ratchet up your responsibility in terms of family, kids, etc., you need to plan. If you want to be an entrepreneur or be in a startup, you need to plan much more carefully, right? When you're in your 20s, you live by yourself, you can bet the farm, because if you lose everything, it doesn't matter. You're gonna get back on your feet. You're gonna find another job. There's very low risk. What's the worst that can happen? You get into 5-10 grand worth of credit card debt, because that's all they're willing to lend you anyway. Go find a job and pay it off in 6 months. Try again. But when you have a family and you have responsibilities and a mortgage and all these things, it's like you can't do those things.
Yeah.
So it's like youth, and you know, it's like people take it for granted. They're like, I'll always be able to do this. It's like, no, that's not real.
Yeah.
Unless, you know, other parts of your life are going to suffer greatly.
Yeah, and it's also having, like, putting in perspective, like, what your goals are, right?
Yeah.
Because for a lot of people, like, their goal is to have a very, you know, somewhat stable, like, lifestyle business, right? Where it's, the goal is I want to be able to do, like, whatever my passion is. I want to do that for, like, forever, and you know, and I'm going to make the money I make, and you know, we'll watch the finances and all that. That's fine, but you know, it's not about like having like a high growth business necessarily, right? And that's okay, but as long as you have that in mind at the beginning, and you know what you want, because if you're trying to get that like high growth, you know, and do the passion side, the lifestyle business, it's like, it's tough to do both unless you have a unicorn of an idea, you know, that you can execute on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much, Steffen, for having us at your lovely startup and your space. This looks fantastic. You know, winning the lottery in terms of being able to find a space that met your trifecta of criteria. And, you know, we know that you're going to be successful because, you know, you have amazing experience behind you, and, you know, your heart's just so big and you want what's best for your clients and the people that you work with. So there's no doubt in my mind that this will go really well.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Really appreciate the time. Great to see you guys again and to host you here. And I wish you all the best as well.
Thank you.
Cool.